Senator McConnell, thank you for joining us today. I know that you wanted to start off our talk by discussing your push to wear masks. Do you want to say something about that real quick?
Yeah, people ask me all the time, what can I do? It's pretty clear the coronavirus is not going away until we get a vaccine. And the single most important thing everyone can do is wear a mask, practice social distancing, prevent the spread. We have to prevent the spread because we're not going to shut the economy down again. Dr. Fauci has said we can't shut the economy down again, and that's the nation's foremost public health expert. So we each need to do our part by wearing a mask and practicing social distancing. We can help get us through this period until we get a vaccine.
Before we get to the coronavirus, a little bit of political news was made yesterday. Your Senate colleague Kamala Harris was named as the Democratic vice presidential candidate. Any thoughts on that, and any thoughts on her as a colleague in the Senate?
Well, I congratulate Senator Harris. It's a great honor for her to be selected to run for vice president. It is worth remembering, however, that almost never do Americans vote for vice president. No matter who the nominee is, they always focus on the presidential race. And I think it'll really come down to Biden versus Trump. And the American people have a big choice to make this November.
So why the stalemate on the stimulus, and why is the Senate in recess right now when everybody's pushing for a possible compromise or trying to get this done?
Yeah, actually, the Senate is not in recess. But you're right. We're not voting this week. The House, I don't believe, is here at all. It's because the discussions really are between the Speaker, the Democrat leader of the Senate, and the administration. They are the negotiators. I stay involved in knowing what's going on. But ultimately, the president, who can sign something into law, and the Democrats have to reach an agreement. We're at a stalemate. I think it is really unfortunate. We have an unemployment insurance problem. The popular PPP small business loan program has expired. The American people need help. So this argument needs to stop, and we need to come together and provide the relief that we need. I've offered a suggestion that's under consideration that focuses on liability protection so that we don't have an epidemic of lawsuits against hospitals, doctors, nurses, colleges, universities, and small businesses, kids back in school, PPP program, jobs, and healthcare. So those are where the focus ought to be. School is about to start all over America. It'll be up to localities to decide whether they do it in person or remotely, but either way, they need help. In my proposal, we actually provided more for education than in the House Democratic proposal, which overall was 3 times as big as what I think is appropriate at this particular juncture.
Senator Kaine followed you up on the floor just a little bit ago, and he said that the Democrats are willing to meet the administration and the Republicans halfway, but that the White House is saying no, they want to stick with the Senate Republican plan. What do you say to that? Are you willing to compromise if it comes to that?
Well, of course we're willing to compromise, but bear in mind they passed a $3.4 trillion proposal, and they've suggested that they take $1 trillion off of that. This is an enormous amount of money. Already, based upon what we've done back in March and April, we now have a national debt the size of our economy since World War II. We don't want to just throw money away. This is important to the future financial health of the country. A narrower, more targeted proposal makes the most sense, focusing on direct cash payments into people's pockets, kids in school, jobs, and education. A total focus on where the problem is, not all of these unrelated items that are in the Senate, in the House proposal. For example, a tax cut for millionaires in New York and California. What does that have to do with the COVID crisis?
Do you think that the unemployment insurance should be extended back to $600 a week or $400, or where do you think that should be, or is that something that's not in your proposal?
Well, what we've said in our proposal is you don't want a situation where a neighbor doesn't go back to work because he's making more not working than the neighbor across the street who makes less by going back to work. In other words, we want to balance it out in such a way that it's not more advantageous to not work than to work. But the states do need help. Unemployment is important. We're prepared to plus that up, just not as so far as to discourage work, because getting back to work is really important if we're going to have any chance to get back to normal in our country.
Since the talks reached a stalemate on Friday, the president obviously issued his executive orders over the weekend. What are your thoughts on those executive orders? And when the Governor Beshear stands up and says they are unworkable at a state level and they're actually going to cost the state more, upwards of $1 billion or more, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the governor's just wrong about that, and that needs to be resolved. And the idea was to help the governors, not make it less likely. And so I would hope our governor, wholly aside from the party difference between the governor and the president, would want to provide this additional assistance. It's a lot more than they're getting right now, which is nothing, because last week the plus up in unemployment insurance expired.
You mentioned schools. Governor Beshear also recommended, he can't mandate it, but he recommended the schools not open for in-person class until September 28th. When you heard that about your home state, and what are you hearing from other superintendents around Kentucky? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it seems to me that's a local decision. Every school board, every school superintendent has to figure that out. What I think we need to do at the federal government level is provide financial assistance no matter what decisions made at the local level. In some counties, particularly ones that are not as heavily populated, there isn't good internet service in many of those counties. It probably makes more sense for them to get back in the classroom. Either way, they need financial help, and we're happy to stand ready to provide that assistance in Washington.
Three more aspects of the last stimulus that you mentioned in your floor speech that are a couple of them, and the one other one I wanted to touch upon. One is the PPP program obviously has expired. I've done a story on how much money came into this area and how much it has helped. Where do you see that going? Number two, as I know, a big contentious issue is getting money into local governments, state and local governments, because their tax revenues are down so much, but they don't want to lay off first responders. And then the third thing I wanted to ask about is eviction moratoriums, and that expired with the last stimulus. I am hearing from experts that we're going to have a wave of evictions starting in September or October if something isn't done. Well, what's your take on those three issues in the stimulus? Okay,
well, why don't we take them one issue at a time? Which one would you like to discuss first?
Let's talk PPP first.
Okay, 50,000 loans in Kentucky, $5.3 billion has come into Kentucky small businesses through the PPP program. There was no replenishment of PPP in the House Democratic proposal. It is in our proposal. We need to provide a second tranche for these businesses. PPP has been enormously successful.
What's your take on giving aid to local and state governments?
Yeah, here's the situation. We, back in April and March, provided $150 billion for state and local government. On average, across the country, they've only spent 25% of that. In Kentucky, they've only spent 6% of what we've already sent them. So what I'd like to do is to provide more flexibility for them to use the money they've already gotten before we start talking about sending them additional money when they haven't spent what we sent them 4 months ago.
And I know you've said that some of it, you're afraid that some of it is going to go towards cities that were already in financial distress because of other reasons, whether it's pension liabilities or whatever. I can tell you that the city of Cincinnati, which I deal with a lot here, says that that's not a very fair argument. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I don't think we ought to be borrowing money from future generations will have to pay back to solve pension problems that cities and states have created for themselves totally unrelated to the pandemic. So I don't think any of this money we provide for states and localities ought to be related to solving pension problems. First, they should be demonstrated need. And as I just said, in Kentucky, only 6% of the money we've already sent them has been used. And so, just throwing money at this problem when there's no demonstrated need strikes me as highly irresponsible.
Two more questions. The one about in the last stimulus, there was a moratorium on evictions for federal properties and federal programs. Are you in favor of reinstating that? And what do you think about evictions on the rise?
Yeah, well, the president dealt with that in one of his executive orders last Saturday, and I'm glad he did that, and that hopefully will hold up and delay the eviction issue.
I will say that experts have said it's not an actual moratorium, it's more like a guideline, and it didn't actually ban evictions. It doesn't go as far as what was in the original stimulus.
Yeah, well, that would be a good argument to quit fiddling around here and get an overall agreement. The Democrats clearly are dragging their heels. They don't want to get an agreement. The best way to get an outcome on eviction and these other issues is to finally come together and reach an agreement.
And then finally, in his press conference the other day, Governor Beshear also said that the Kentucky economy is actually doing better than expected. Part of that is possibly because of the $600 extra benefit for unemployment, but that tax revenues are higher than what was anticipated. As one of the top statewide elected officials, from Kentucky, what's your reaction to that?
Well, that's another argument why this suggestion by Democrats in Washington that states need almost $1 trillion doesn't make any sense. Many states, the economy has held up much better than people thought with the reopening. As I said, Kentucky's only spent 6% of the money they've already been sent. I think we ought to do this based upon demonstrated need, and that's why additional assistance for state governments is controversial, because we want to see the need. What we do know is we need money for education. We need direct cash payments to people. We need money so small businesses don't lay off folks. And we know we need additional money for healthcare providers. That we know for sure.
How far are you willing to compromise? I mean, let's say, I know theirs was trillions off from what yours was. Are you prepared to meet in the middle, or is there a figure in your head that says, okay, I can go this far, but not that far?
Yeah, look, I'm not going to give you a figure. What I recommended was about $1 trillion, which is still an enormous amount of money. I mean, I can't believe we're talking about trillions as if they were billions. That would be on top of roughly $3 trillion that we already allocated back in April and March. What I don't want to do is to borrow money that future generations have to pay back for things that there's no demonstrated need for. And that's why there's been a big argument about this additional assistance for state governments.
I've kept you a couple minutes over than what we agreed to. Anything I didn't ask that you wanted to talk about?
No, I think we covered it. Thanks a lot.